Live television leaves no room for second takes. When something goes wrong, millions see it happen in real time. In the next few stories, we're looking at the moments when routine broadcasts turned into fatal events, worst accidents and emergencies captured on camera with no warning at all. It was November 18th, 2017 in Springfield, Missouri, during a late afternoon school pageant aired on the local community access cable channel. The multi-purpose hall was warm, and several hundred students and parents filled rows of plastic chairs around a raised stage. The event was part of the school's annual cultural festival. Mira Talwar, 16, was a first-year student known for being quiet but dependable during school activities. Teachers described her as someone who followed instructions closely and participated without drawing attention to herself. She joined the pageant after her advisor encouraged her to try something new, and most of her preparation involved practicing the walking sequence and adjusting to the weight of her traditional costume. To fit the cultural theme, organizers placed lit candles inside short glass holders along the catwalk. Staff tested the spacing earlier and reminded contestants to stay centered, believing the layout was safe as long as everyone stayed within the marked line. The program began smoothly, and Mira completed her first walk without issues. During the second round, contestants stood slightly closer to the runway's edge for camera framing. As Mira shifted her weight to begin her turn, witnesses said she stepped just past the taped marker. The movement caused her gown's hem to swing outward and briefly into the area near one of the candles. A moment later, the lower edge of the skirt passed near one of the candles. Witnesses described seeing the fabric soften and curl as it touched the flame, followed by a sudden flare when heat concentrated on a single section of the skirt. Once ignited, the burning and melting material spread quickly across the lower layers, and heat began climbing along the folded sections of the dress. Several adults near the stage tried to reach her, but the hoop-style frame under the gown caused the melting fabric to cling to its structure and stay close to her legs. Mira tried stepping backward toward the center of the runway, but the uneven weight of the burning material pulled at the lower part of the skirt. Those nearest said she lost balance after only a few steps, dropping to one knee before falling fully onto her side. By then, witnesses saw flames rising toward the upper part of the dress, and the rigid frame underneath held the melting fabric close to her torso. Stage volunteers approached from both sides and attempted to lift portions of the skirt, but the fused layers did not separate. Fire blankets were placed over areas still producing open flame, while handheld extinguishers were used along the lower section. The live cable feed captured the first moments of ignition and a brief view of Mira stepping backward before the control room cut the broadcast and switched to a standby graphic after a short delay. Emergency responders arrived minutes later and were guided directly to the stage. Staff cleared space around her as remaining hotspots were suppressed. Mira was transported from the hall but was later confirmed to have died from extensive burn injuries. Officials noted that the synthetic construction of the dress and the wire-supported frame intensified heat retention and reduced any chance of removing the burning layers. Footage from the live broadcast was used to confirm the sequence of events and support the final incident report. It was August 14, 2018 in Hutchinson, Kansas, a warm weekday morning during the taping of a small community cable variety show. Inside the barn-style studio, the air was dry and still as about 60 people, mostly local families and farmers, sat in folding chairs around a fenced demonstration pen used for livestock segments. Karen Wyatt, 41, was a veterinarian who had spent more than a decade working among the small cattle and goat farms scattered throughout the region. Colleagues described her as steady and methodical, someone who preferred calm handling techniques and rarely rushed through demonstrations. She often volunteered at local events and had appeared on the program once before, making her familiar with the studio layout and the routine for livestock segments. Producers planned a short demonstration on horn management for young cattle. A young bull was brought into the pen, smaller than a mature animal but still strong and unpredictable. 2 ranch hands stayed inside the enclosure to assist. Audience members were reminded to remain seated and avoid sudden movements. The setup was basic. Overhead lights hung from a low wooden frame, and the floor was packed dirt. The pen was built from metal panels anchored to a non-structural center post, mainly used for attaching signage. A roaming camera operator stood at the gate, while another camera on a tripod recorded a wide shot for the community channel. Karen began the segment by holding a rope lead attached to the bull's halter, explaining common safety steps. At first, the bull moved calmly, shifting its weight and kicking small puffs of dust into the air. A few audience members later said they noticed it stepping more frequently, but nothing suggested immediate risk. The incident occurred when Karen turned slightly toward the host to answer a question. Several witnesses reported seeing the bull sidestep twice and lower its head. Karen adjusted the rope, but the movement that followed was too fast to counter. The bull lunged forward without warning. The horn struck Karen in the chest with a sharp impact that several attendees said they heard over the studio microphones. The force lifted her backward, driving her into the center post. The post snapped at the base, kicking up a burst of dirt as it gave way. Karen collapsed near the edge of the pen. Audience reactions were mixed. Some people jumped up, others moved into the aisles, while a portion remained frozen in place. Ushers attempted to keep spectators from pressing toward the panels as the ranch hands acted quickly. One handler tightened the rope. The other pushed the bull against the far side of the pen. The control room cut the cable feed seconds after the impact. Dust settled around Karen as staff cleared the walkway and moved the bull out. EMTs arrived within minutes, entered through the side door, and began their assessment while ushers created space and kept spectators back. A short time later, officials confirmed that Karen Wyatt had died from internal injuries, including severe trauma to her chest and abdomen from the horn strike. Recovered broadcast footage, which captured the bull's sidestep and rapid lunge, was later used to confirm the sequence of events. The station released a brief statement and canceled all animal handling segments for the season. A review team was assigned to inspect the pen design, the failed support post, and the overall setup used for demonstrations. The barn studio remained closed for inspections through the week. It was December 6, 2015 in Jaipur, India, during a cool and dry afternoon, as spectators lined the main parade route for the annual holiday procession. Families, students, and neighborhood groups filled the barricaded sidewalks, while the local community cable channel broadcast the event live, using 2 mobile camera units placed along the roadway. Harish Menon, 45, worked as a school maintenance technician and was well known in his neighborhood for helping local cultural groups build parade displays. Friends described him as patient and skilled with bamboo frames, cloth backdrops, and basic electrical fixtures. He had assisted in several community events over the years and was invited to join the procession because organizers trusted his steady handling during live segments. The route included a gentle upward slope near an intersection. Parade organizers knew the float would pass beneath older, uninsulated distribution lines, but they had not accounted for how the incline would reduce the clearance as the vehicle climbed. The metal frame was already tall, and the added height from the slope brought it closer to the overhead wires than expected. As the float reached the incline, spectators near the barricades noticed one of the rear banners starting to sag. Harish stepped toward it, leaning slightly over the platform rail to pull the cloth back into place. Witnesses later said he kept his focus on the banner and did not look up to check the height of the frame as the float continued up the slope. From the roadside and on the cable broadcast, viewers saw the top of the metal structure rising toward the overhead distribution line. As the tractor moved a few more feet forward, the highest point of the frame brushed the uninsulated wire. The metal frame was bolted directly to the tractor's chassis, which provided a continuous conductive path to ground. The contact created a brief jerk in the structure, enough for several spectators to notice the frame flex slightly. What followed happened quickly. A sharp crack came from the wire, and a bright flash spread across the upper section of the frame. People closest to the float said they heard a buzzing sound as the lights on the float went out at once. Harish had one hand on the metal rail while reaching for the banner, and the moment the flash occurred, witnesses reported seeing his arm tense and his body lock in place for an instant. His legs straightened, and his shoulders pulled back in a rigid posture. The force of the current caused him to lose footing, and he fell backward onto the platform, landing near the edge without making any further movement. Sparks dropped from the point of contact above, briefly illuminating the rear section of the float. Parade marshals moved along the barricades to keep spectators from pushing closer, while the 2 volunteers on the platform stepped away from the railing and toward the opposite side. The broadcast continued for a few seconds, until the control room cut to a standby graphic. Later, investigators reviewed the recovered footage to confirm the exact moment the frame touched the wire. EMTs arrived within minutes, entering the area only after utility workers confirmed the line was no longer energized. Responders climbed onto the rear platform and checked Harish for breathing and circulation, while spectators watched from behind the barricades. The assessment was brief. Officials later confirmed that he died from electrocution caused by high-voltage current traveling through the metal frame when it contacted the overhead wire. Staff documented the damaged frame, the point of contact, and the float's lighting system before it was moved. Authorities halted the parade at that section and ordered new height surveys for future routes. It was March 4, 2016, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, during a routine morning newscast on a regional TV station. Outside, the weather was mild and traffic moved normally. Inside the compact studio, the early crew prepared for the 6 a.m. broadcast. Camera checks, microphone tests, and teleprompter adjustments followed the usual sequence. Lana Reyes, 28, was a morning reporter who occasionally filled in at the anchor desk. Co-workers described her as quiet and self-directed, someone who preferred preparing her segments alone and kept most of her belongings close during shifts. She often arrived early for morning broadcasts, bringing a small personal bag she kept near her workstation during on-air blocks. Outside of her assigned community updates, she rarely interacted on set unless prompted. And several colleagues noted she tended to manage her breaks and workspace independently. The studio setup included 2 cameras aimed at the desk, one operated manually and the other on a fixed track, while a digital backdrop displayed the station logo. Behind the glass wall, the director, audio technician, and teleprompter operator monitored the rundown from the control booth. At 6:07 a.m., the broadcast transitioned to Lana for her scheduled public affairs segment. She read steadily from the teleprompter, and nothing in her delivery suggested a problem during the first half of the report. Midway through the segment, Lana paused while the teleprompter continued to scroll. The operator later said the pause looked deliberate. Lana then made an unscripted remark about the morning rundown, causing several people in the control booth to turn toward the director. Moments later, she lowered her eyes toward the open space under her workstation. Her hand moved out of frame as she reached downward. From the booth and the studio floor, staff could see her lift a metallic object as she raised her hand back into view. The station had a short delay buffer, intended only for correcting minor on-air slips. It was too brief to prevent the initial seconds of what followed from airing. Before the director could switch to another camera or cut the feed, Lana brought the firearm upward and turned it toward herself. A single discharge occurred while she remained in frame. On the studio floor, the main anchor froze before pushing his chair back. One camera operator stepped away from the desk, while another kept his camera pointed forward until the director ordered a stop. In the control booth, the audio technician muted the studio microphones as the director instructed the switch to a standby graphic. Crew members near the set moved toward the hallway, while a producer called for emergency services and alerted building security. Security arrived within minutes and directed non-essential staff out of the room. About 5 minutes after the call, EMTs entered the studio and were guided to Lana's position. Cables were cleared from their path. Responders performed an on-scene assessment while staff waited in the hallway. The station switched to pre-recorded content for the remainder of the broadcast. Later that morning, officials confirmed that Lana Reyes had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound during the live segment. The station issued a brief statement acknowledging the on-air incident and noting that a full internal review and formal investigation were underway. Live programming for the week was suspended, and the newsroom remained closed for safety and procedural evaluations. It was August 29, 2017, in Northern California, during one of the region's most active wildfire seasons. Afternoon temperatures were in the high 90s, and thick smoke drifted across the foothills as crews from several counties worked to contain a fast-moving fire that had already burned hundreds of acres. Local news outlets broadcast live updates from the perimeter, showing tall smoke columns visible from miles away. Among the firefighters assigned to the incident was 32-year-old Miguel Serrano, a seasonal wildland crew member with 5 years of experience. He worked summer fire seasons across multiple counties and often volunteered for difficult assignments. That morning, he was placed on a 3-person engine crew positioned along a narrow access road on the fire's eastern edge, where containment lines were being reinforced. The terrain was uneven with dry brush, loose soil, and scattered oak trees. Winds shifted unpredictably, pushing embers across the road. From a distance, television cameras captured smoke rolling down the hillside. Reporters remained at a roadblock where law enforcement kept them behind a marked safety boundary. Miguel's crew worked on clearing brush and reinforcing a handline meant to slow the fire's advance. Another unit operated a short distance upslope. Witnesses later said conditions looked stable. Winds were steady, flame height moderate, and the fire appeared to be moving laterally rather than downhill. The first sign of trouble came when a sudden wind shift pushed embers into a pocket of unburned brush below the crew's position. The ignition was nearly immediate. A flare-up ignited a small section of vegetation and grew rapidly, sending flames upward toward the handline. Nearby firefighters shouted warnings, and radio traffic captured urgency as conditions deteriorated faster than expected. Miguel attempted to pull a hose line back toward the road when the wind intensified again. The fire produced a brief torching effect, with a vertical column of flames rising as heat drew air upward. Embers blew across the hose, forcing him to adjust his footing. Witnesses from the adjacent crew reported seeing him stumble on loose soil near a drop-off along the slope. As he tried to regain balance, flames surged toward the line. The fire overran the narrow section of brush where Miguel stood. With vegetation igniting behind him, his escape route narrowed instantly. A local news camera positioned farther down the road captured the moment the flame front moved through the area. Only a few seconds aired before the photographer reflexively lowered the camera and the broadcast shifted. When the smoke thinned enough for nearby crews to see, Miguel was lying near the burned slope, unresponsive. Firefighters attempted to reach him, but heat pockets and falling debris forced them to approach cautiously. Additional crews used hand tools to cool the area before others moved in with protective gear. Responders on site conducted an assessment once the flames subsided. From the roadblock, reporters filmed firefighters clearing space while personnel directed media away. Later that evening, officials confirmed that Miguel Serrano died from extensive third-degree burns, consistent with exposure to a rapidly advancing flame front. Investigators reviewed wind data, radio logs, and broadcast footage to determine that a sudden downslope gust pushed flames toward the handline too quickly to escape. Agency leaders later updated escape route spacing and wind monitoring points for slope operations. It was November 3, 2018, in coastal Grayford, Oregon, during an active thunderstorm warning that had been upgraded an hour earlier. Wind pushed inland from the shoreline, and scattered rain swept across the waterfront district. Most residents stayed indoors while the regional news station prepared extended severe weather coverage. Assigned to the field update was 29-year-old Arvin Smith, a junior correspondent known for volunteering for outdoor segments in unstable conditions. He had been with the station just over a year and often insisted on covering storms directly from the coast instead of from safer inland spots. The control booth initially instructed the team to stay closer to their vehicle for the live shot, but Arvin pushed for a position along the shoreline barrier. After several exchanges, the crew followed him toward the coastal edge despite reservations. A camera operator, Jonas Reed, and a sound technician, Meera Patel, accompanied him. Both later confirmed they preferred a location farther back, where pooling runoff wasn't spreading across the pavement. Arvin stepped forward to frame the water behind him and indicated the shot looked clear enough. They set up near a concrete barrier separating the coastal road from the water. Lightning had been offshore earlier, but the storm shifted inland faster than radar models predicted. The control booth told the team to keep the segment short, reminding them that lightning safety applied even during brief hits. At 6:12 p.m., the broadcast switched to Arvin's live shot. Viewers saw him standing a few feet from the barrier while waves struck the rocks behind him. Wind pulled at his jacket, and the microphone carried intermittent static. Arvin began explaining the approaching storm band, urging viewers to avoid flooded, low-lying routes. Behind him, the sky flickered. Mira monitored the audio feed and glanced toward the waterline repeatedly. Jonas adjusted his stance, aware of the shifting gusts. In the control booth, staff watched the radar tightening over the shoreline and prepared to cut away. The incident occurred roughly 30 seconds into the report. A violent thunderclap hit nearby, loud enough that the camera feed shook. Viewers later reported seeing a bright flash behind Arvin. According to Jonas, lightning struck a tall metal mooring post near the jetty. The electrical discharge traveled down the pole and spread across the rain-soaked pavement as a surface ground current. Arvin, closest to the point of spread, appeared to take the direct impact. The flash filled the frame. The live feed captured Arvin's body stiffening, then collapsing forward onto the pavement. Jonas lowered the camera abruptly while Mira stepped back and warned him not to touch metal equipment. The station's short delay buffer wasn't long enough to prevent the first seconds of the collapse from airing. The anchors froze mid-sentence before the cutoff was activated. Rain intensified as the crew reacted. Jonas moved toward Arvin but hesitated when another flash lit the clouds. Mira signaled to a nearby security patrol for help. Arvin remained motionless, his microphone and cables scattered across the wet pavement. When lightning activity eased, the crew edged closer. Arvin did not respond. Jonas stayed several feet back, wary of residual ground charge, while Mira waved down a security vehicle approaching from the marina. The emergency call was placed within moments. EMTs arrived about 6 minutes later, entering only after security confirmed conditions were stable. Responders performed an on-scene assessment while the crew waited near the road's edge. The station canceled all remaining field reports and switched to in-studio radar coverage. Later that evening, officials confirmed that Arvin Smith died from cardiac arrest and internal injuries caused by the lightning strike. Footage helped investigators review the timing of the flash and identify conductive structures at the scene. The station issued new rules requiring greater distance from metal fixtures, stricter storm proximity thresholds, and crew veto power for unsafe positions. If you want more stories like this, subscribe.